Welcome. That's amazing that we can all connect together, just from these little devices. Like we can just all connect together and come together to study the Quran. That's amazing. That's a really beautiful thing. That's a blessing. It's humbling too to think about, um, just how many of us around the world can just connect together from these great distances. That's such an amazing thing. Thank you for sharing that. So we're gonna go back to talking about the concept of khushuu. Um, so I'm going to review a little bit because not everyone might have been here yesterday, and even for those of us that were, it's still good to review because things happen, we forget, and just to bring us up to speed to where we left off. And for those who weren't here yesterday, even though I'm going to review, yesterday's live is posted on my YouTube channel. So I've been trying to now, every day for our lives, I've been trying to record them and immediately, either that same day or the next day, post them on my YouTube channel. So that way, if you want to follow up or if you missed the previous one, you can go check that out. So yesterday we started talking about the concept of khushua. So just as a reminder, the reason one of the reasons we wanted to study this in detail is because this concept is talked about a lot in popular Islamic discourse, and it's usually most times only related to or only talked about as being related to the salah, right? Not always. There are some people who might talk about it in a more general sense, but most times in just the popular discourse, right? Because if you dig for it, I'm saying the popular discourse intentionally, because if you dig for it in different books, you will find other discussions, most likely, because it's a general concept. And if you look at the verses of the Quran, you can see it's a general concept. But in the popular discourse, when you usually hear this concept talked about, it's usually talked about in relationship to salah. And that comes from, or one of the places that it comes from, is the ayah in the Quran that describes the believers as saying, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, that the believers are indeed successful, those who are khashi'un in their salat, meaning they have khushua. So that's generally where you hear this concept talked about. And then you hear various explanations of exactly what that is and how to accomplish that. So you hear it translated, for example, as humility, or words of a similar nature. And then people will explain, well, how do you achieve this state of humility? How do you achieve the state of khushua in salah? You achieve it by concentrating on what you're saying, not having other outside thoughts, focusing on what you're saying and doing. That's normally how it's explained. I'm not saying that that's what I'm saying in this class. That is the explanation. I'm saying that's normally how people explain it. And that's not necessarily saying that that's all the way wrong either. Hannah, would you do me a favor? Surreal James 1, could you go ahead and mute him so that way we don't have debates going on in the comments? Because we're here just to, as I said yesterday, just to have a class. We're not here to debate or argue with anyone. We just want to keep positive vibes in our class. Thank you. Um, so so not necessarily saying Quran verse for khadi'un. Yeah, khadi'un is another word in the Quran. That word, it maybe has some similar translations, but it's not exactly the same. But I can give you a verse for that if you just want the reference, because it does have some, perhaps some relationships in terms of the wording, like khasha'a, khada'a. You see they're similar in wording. Wa alaikum salam. Oh, Chashion, you want that verse? Okay, I wasn't sure if you just wanted the reference for the other verse. So the verse that I quoted, and I'm going to give you some more references, but the verse that I just quoted, Salam, is 23. That should be 1 and 2. But let me just double check for you, just to make sure I'm giving you the right verse. Yeah, that was 23, 1 and 2. So the verse that mentions Chashi'un is 23, 2. So 23, 1 and 2 is successful indeed are the believers, those who are khashi'un in their salah. Okay? So the problem with the normal, at least in my very humble opinion, the problem with the normal the problem with the normal, like, common way that khushua is described, as I just mentioned, this state of humility that's achieved by concentrating and not having outside thoughts in the salah. The problem I have with that explanation is not that it's necessarily wrong, but that it's difficult to apply in a universal way. It's difficult to apply that explanation to everyone, right? So so what ends up happening is people who are more neurodivergent or who might have like ADHD, stuff like that, they might find it difficult to not have outside thoughts, right? And so therefore they think or have been taught that that is contrary to having khushua. So they end up feeling bad about themselves because they're like, I can never have khushua because I always have these thoughts. So for me, I question the idea that that's the only way to think about khushua, is that you have this state of concentration where you don't have any outside thoughts. So so what we did yesterday was we went through some language definitions of the root word for khushua, khashi'un, and all of the various related root words. We went through some of the linguistic meanings of that root, which is khasha'a. So the root for khushua, khashi'un, all those different, all those different variations of the word, uh, uh, all goes back to that three-letter root word, which is khasha'a, khasha'a, kha, sheen, and ayn. So we talked about some of the meanings of that root word in Arabic. So some of that meanings in the root word in Arabic, of that root word in Arabic, I'll review real quick. So one example that one Arabic dictionary gives is that if we say in Arabic, jidarun khashiyat, jidarun khashiyat, a wall that is khashiyat, that means it's a wall that falls down or collapses and is level with the ground. So from that definition, we get the idea that part of the meaning of the word khashiyah or khushua or khasha'a is for something to go down. Okay. Then we see also another usage in Arabic is if we say al khashiyah min al ard, al khashiyah min al ard, the part of the earth or ground that is khashiyah, it means that it's soft and malleable and the wind can stir it up. The wind can like raise dust, it can move it. It's not like hard or compact or like solid mud or something like that. We call that al khashiyah. So from these couple different examples in Arabic, one Arabic scholar sums the definition, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, sums up the meaning of khushua by in this definition. He says, hubutu al khushua is hubutu ma sha'nuhu al irtifa'u wal ghiladu. That al khushua is the decline or lessening or going down of something that normally would be raised, or the softening of something that would be rough or rugged. So something that would be normally raised, would be normally high, right? Khushua is for that thing to go down. Or something that would normally be rough or rugged, khushua is for that thing to become softer, or the roughness and the ruggedness of it to become to become softened. So that's how this scholar summarizes the Arabic meaning of khushua. And you can see where he's getting some of that from. Because in Arabic, if we say again, jidarun khashiyah, if we say a wall that's khashiyah, that means it fell down and it collapsed. Okay? So a wall, we expect it to be standing up. So that's why he said, hubutu ma sha'nuhu el irtifa', the falling down of something that would normally be elevated. Okay? So just that definition shows that khushua is about way more than just not having outside thoughts or just concentrating and focusing. It's about taking something that would normally be elevated, like applying that to ourselves. We normally want to elevate ourselves. We normally want to be seen, right? We want to be respected. Like, who doesn't want to be respected? A lot of the things that we do in life is because we want someone to respect us or to honor us. So khushua is to lower oneself. That's one possible meaning, is a lowering or bringing down of oneself. Perhaps it could mean lowering one's ego, lowering one's defenses, becoming vulnerable and open to Allah's teachings. Okay? So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it more. I'm just reviewing some of what we talked about yesterday. Another Arabic dictionary, Ibn Faris, he summarizes the meaning of khasha'a by saying at-tatamun, which just means lowering. So he says, if you say in Arabic, for example, khasha'a, someone khasha'a, what that means is either tatamana wa ta'ta'a ra'sahu. That means that person lowers and bows his head. So he explains khasha'a as meaning you take your head and you bow it down. Okay? So that doesn't necessarily mean that we only have to apply it to a physical circumstance. As we'll see from some of the verses in the Quran, it doesn't always apply to a physical circumstance. But there are times when it does, and we talked about some of those verses yesterday, but it basically has to do with lowering something. That's what we're seeing from these different definitions. Another dictionary, Lisan al-Arab, a very famous Arabic dictionary, says khasha'a means rama bi basarihi nahwa al-ard wa ghaddahu wa khafada sawtahu. Khasha'a means a person directed his eyes to the ground and lowered his gaze and lowered his voice. So you see a commonality in these different dictionaries that the Arabic meaning of khasha'a has to do with lowering something. But I like the first one that we read because it gives us an additional meaning of it. It's not just lowering, it's lowering something that would normally be elevated. And that's very interesting, applying that concept to ourselves, because we have a tendency to want to raise our head and to be elevated. So therefore, to have khushuu is to try to lower oneself, right? Now let's look at some of the verses. So we read a verse that referred or used khasha'a in reference to voices, right? Yeah, if I'm glitching, I'm sorry. It's because of the weather probably, because it's raining pretty bad here. It just stopped, so it might help. There's nothing else I can do about it. Is it still choppy? I'll pause for a second. Is it still? How is it now? Is it good now? Okay. Alhamdulillah. It probably just glitched for a second because we're having some bad weather. But I'm looking at the Wi-Fi thing. The Wi-Fi is working. Everything is on. So there's nothing else I could do. It's probably just because of the weather. So one of the verses that we looked at yesterday referred or used the word khasha'a, referring to voices. So it says, وَخَشَعَتِ الْأَصْوَاتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ فَلَا تَسْمَعُ إِلَّا هَمْسًا وَخَشَعَتِ الْأَصْوَاتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ فَلَا تَسْمَعُ إِلَّا هَمْسًا. So it refers to voices. خَشَعَتِ الْأَصْوَاتُ, that the aswat, the voices, will, on that day, talking about the day of judgment, will khasha'at, they will be lowered for Ar-Rahman, فَلَا تَسْمَعُ إِلَّا هَمْسًا. So you won't hear anything but a whisper. Another place that we talked about yesterday was 6843, where it refers to khashi'atan absaruhum. Khashi'atan absaruhum. That on the day of judgment, their eyes will be cast down. But it uses the word khashi'a. Khashi'atan absaruhum. Their vision or their eyes are khashi'a, looking down. So lowered, in other words. So you see how the verses from the Quran support the Arabic definition, that it means to lower something that would normally be elevated. And what really supports this definition, and this is the verse that we left off talking about yesterday, and we're going to proceed from here, is the verse 59:21 that references this word in, or uses this word in reference to a mountain. So a mountain is something by its nature that is elevated, right? So see how that supports the Arabic definition that this scholar gave, where he said it is hubutu ma sha'nuhu al irtifa'u. The verse for voice lowering is, sorry I didn't mention the number of the verse, is chapter 20 verse 108. 108. I forgot to mention the verse, sorry about that. So in 59:21, he talks about the Quran coming down upon a mountain. Now, a mountain is an example in the Quran of something that is by its nature elevated, right? Because he tells us, as the verse we referenced yesterday, 1737, I believe that verse was that we referenced for this. Let me double check. I believe it's 1737, or if not, it's right in that area. So that was, yeah, it was 1737, where he says, وَلَن تَبْلُغَ الْجِبَالَ طُولًا, that you would never be able to reach the mountains in height. So he uses the mountains as an example of a height that we can never reach. We would never be able to be that big, right? So an example to humble ourselves, right? So the mountains are something intrinsically elevated, that by their nature, they are high and elevated. So you see how he gets this definition, that scholar, where he said, Hubutu ma sha'nuhu al-irtifa'u, that al-khushua is the going down of something that by its nature, it is usually elevated. So in the verse 59:21, look how he describes the mountain. He says, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. He said, had we sent down this Quran upon a mountain, you would have seen it خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. You would have seen it خاشعا. So he describes the mountain as being khashi'an if the Quran had come down upon it, meaning you would see it lowering itself. You see how that definition fits? Because the definition of khushua that was given was hubutu ma sha'nuhu al-irtifa'u, the going down of something whose nature is normally to be elevated. So in 1737, he references the mountains as being of a height or an elevation that we don't reach, right? And in 59:21, he says, if the Quran was sent down upon a mountain, it would be what? Khashi'an, meaning it would come down, it would lower itself, right? Yeah, so it's an example. And then mutasaddian, splitting. Khashi'an, mutasaddian. In other words, opening, because remember we related that verse to what verse? 86:12. So we related 59:21 also to 86:12, because in 86:12 it uses the word sada for the earth. Well, ardi, that is sada. And by the earth, that is sada, who possesses by its nature splitting. It opens. Things come out of it, and it's permeable where things can go within it. Rain and seeds and stuff like that. So it accepts things that create growth, and things grow out of it. So Allah described it, wal ardi, that is sada. And by the earth that possesses the quality of sada, opening, splitting, right? So in 59:21, he says, if the Quran had came down upon a mountain, لَرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِعًا مُتَصَدِّعًا. You would have seen it خَاشِعًا, it would lower itself, مُتَصَدِّعًا, and it would be splitting open, right? So it would become open and permeable and vulnerable to the message and the life-giving water of the Quran to permeate it and to cause things to come out of it, right? So that's a beautiful verse to understand the idea of khushua. Hubutu ma sha'nuhu al-irtifa'u. It is the going down of of something whose normal nature is to be elevated. So if the Quran would have this effect on a mountain, like this is a parable. How do we know this is a parable? Because if we read the rest of the verse. So this tells us that we're supposed to be thinking about this verse as a parable in relationship to us and how we should react to the Quran and what khushua with the Quran actually is. Because at the end of that verse, he says, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ. And these are the parables which we set forth for people. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Perhaps they may think or so that they may think. So why does Allah tell us this about the mountain and the Quran coming down upon the mountain and what kind of an effect that would have? Is for us to think, right? It's for us to think about, what does khushuu mean? How does the Quran affect the mountain? How would that affect us? How's the Quran supposed to affect us? So we see from this verse not only support for the Arabic definition of the word khasha'a or khushua as being the lowering of something whose normal nature is to be elevated, but we also see that the concept, subhanAllah, for sure, we also see that the concept of khushua is a general concept. Like, it's a general quality that we're supposed to have. It's not something that's only for salah. And that's what I was saying in the beginning, that the way that it's usually explained in the popular discourse is usually in reference to salah specifically. But we see from this verse that khushua is a quality that we're supposed to have in reference to our receptivity of the Quran. How we're supposed to engage with the Quran is to be in a state of khushua, okay? A state of lowering ourselves. Follow my point? So it's way deeper, I believe, than just saying, oh, it's concentration or just humility or not having outside thoughts. It's a complete method and path of engaging with the Quran. Okay? So that's number one. Now I want to relate this to another verse, which is 41:39. Because I think this is also a very interesting verse. So 41:39 says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنَّكَ تَرَى الْأَرْضَ خَاشِعَةً. Okay, so 41:9 says, and from his ayat is that you see the earth khashi'ah. You see the earth as being khashi'ah. Okay, فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ. So when we send down upon it water, اهتزت, it stirs, it moves, warabat, and it grows, it produces growth. Inna الذي أحياها, the one who brought it to life, لمحيي الموتى, will surely bring the dead to life. إنه على كل شيء قدير, truly he is able to do all things. Now, what's interesting about this verse is, we see this same concept that we're studying, which is khushu, khasha'a. Yeah, getting rid of preconceived biases, right? So in this verse, 41:39, the earth, the ground, is described as khashi'a. Okay? Look at how beautiful that is. So how it phrases it in Arabic, I'll just write it real quick, is khashi'a. I'll write it with the English letters. Khashia. Okay? So you see the earth, salam, you see the earth as khashia. Okay? So number one, this is going to help us deepen our understanding of what is khushua, because the earth itself is described as khashia. Now, let's unpack that a little bit, because we can look at it on different layers. It can be explained on different levels and layers. So first of all, on the most basic layer, we can think of it as a state of stillness, okay? And why can we think about it like that? Well, first of all, from the idea of lowering, which we've already been talking about. So it's being lowered, right? But also, if we compare this verse to chapter 22, 5. So chapter 22, 5, he says, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ, at the end of the verse, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ حَامِدَةً فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ. So it has a very similar wording, okay? But it uses a different word here. So in 22:5, he says, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ, and you will see the earth حَامِدَةً. Here he uses the word حَامِدَةً. Okay? So you will see the earth as hamida. Hamida. What does hamida mean? Hamida. So the root meaning of hamida in Arabic, we say, for example, hamidatin nar, right? Or hamadatin nar, I'm sorry. Hamadatin nar. We say about fire, we if fire is extinguished or it goes out or it calms down, we say in Arabic hamadat, right? So hamadat or hamada in Arabic means to extinguish or to calm down or to lessen a fire. So he says in this verse, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ حَامِدَةً. You see the earth as being hamida. This to me has such a, like the Quran's language is so poetic and really gives you, it really creates these like word pictures, these visuals, this beautiful imagery. So think about how the Quran here uses a word to describe the earth. Okay, it's describing the earth before things are growing, because right after that he says فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ, when we send down upon it the water, اهتزت, it stirs and moves, وَرَبَتْ, and it grows. So it's describing it in a state of stillness because it says it moves and before the growth happens. It's describing it as hamida. It's extinguished. Like, think about how beautiful that is, that he's using a word to describe the earth that is related to fire, is related to extinguishing fire. I think that creates such a beautiful imagery, because when I think of a fire and I think of all these different flames coming out, and I think of it's like really active and the flames are going here and there, right? And then when it goes out, it's like still and extinguished. So think about the growth of the earth as resembling like this activity and this fire, and like this plant's going here and there and entangling and intertwining. It really presents like this really beautiful like word picture by using the word hamida. It's very poetic, right? So when you look at the two verses, 41:39 and 22:5, they both have similar wordings. Hamida. So, oh, it didn't. Yeah, I did. I don't know why it didn't happen. Sorry about that. I'll try it again. Hamida. Let's see. Oops. Hamida. Let's see if this one works. Hamida. Can everyone see that? And I'll write it in Arabic because there's two different kinds of ha sounds in Arabic. There's the hard ha and there's the soft ha. And this word here is the soft ha. So just in case anyone wants to see the Arabic, so we don't confuse the two types of ha, this is how it's going to look in Arabic. Hamida. Okay? So to become extinguished. Yeah, sorry if anything is lagging. Hopefully the recording of this will come out regular. So if anything is ragging, I'm trying to say regular recording and lagging all at the same time. If anything is lagging, inshallah, I will post this to my YouTube, and hopefully that recording will be good and you can watch it. So look at how beautiful the connection here is. So 22:5 and 41:39 have a very similar wording. So in one verse, he says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنَّكَ تَرَى الْأَرْضَ خَاشِعَةً. And from his ayats is that you see, from his signs and lessons, is that you see the earth as being khashia, lowered, right? And here in this verse he says, وَتَرَى الْأَرْضَ, and you see the earth as hamida, extinguished, right? So when you put them together, they explain each other. So first of all, in 4139, that's why I said perhaps the first thing we can get from that, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنَّكَ تَرَى الْأَرْضَ خَاشِعَةً, and from his signs is that you see the earth as being khashi'ah. The first meaning we can get from that is the earth has become still and lowered and died down and extinguished. Okay? So that supports the overall meaning that we've been studying. But another thing, though, is what happens when the water gets sent down upon it? فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ. So when we send the water or the rain down upon it, right? اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ. It moves, it stirs to life. وَرَبَتْ. And it grows. Okay? So let's think about this. This verse, connecting these last two verses together. The one about the mountain, that the mountain would be khashi'ah, right? Khashi'an, if the Quran came down upon it, and the earth is khashi'ah, and then when water comes down upon it, it stirs to life. Okay, follow this really closely. This is a really, really beautiful connection that we have to think about. So in one verse, he tells us about the mountain, something that would be elevated, this big structure, right? That if the Quran comes down upon it, it would be, you would see it to be khashi'an, right? It would lower itself. And then here in this verse, he says that the earth is khashi'ah, and when the water comes down upon it, right, it stirs, it moves, and it grows, right? So, first of all, there's a connection between the Quran and water. If you look in the Quran, there's different verses that you can see a connection between those two things. That Quran and water have a connection. Both are life-giving. So, perhaps we can understand this verse on different levels. So number one, it's telling us about the earth, right? Something for us to look at as far as the earth, right? And the signs that Allah has placed in the earth. But notice he says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. These are from his signs. So that means what? We're supposed to learn a lesson from them too. So it's not just for us to take it just on a physical level, that we just look at the earth growing and we see it to be described with this word, the khashiyah, and that's it. But also, we should take a lesson from that, and that teaches us something about what is khushoo. So we notice here the state of being khashiyah, of having khushuu, is a state that comes before movement and before growth, right? Because he says, you see the earth as being khashiyah, then when we send down upon it water, it moves and grows. So khashiyah is before the movement and before the growth. Now, what happens, or what's the state of the earth before this happens, before the water comes down upon it, right? So the earth has to have certain components in order for the water to produce growth, doesn't it? It has to have soil that has certain nutrients, has to be certain seeds, right? So if the water, like it was raining just now, I go out there on the sidewalk, there's not going to be growth on the sidewalk. There might be growth sometimes in between the cracks if there's dirt in there, but on the solid concrete, there's not going to be growth. So just because you have the water, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to produce growth, right? There also has to be the constituents of growth present in the material in order for it to grow. So the earth has to have the necessary components for it to grow. It has to have nutrients and seeds and all of those different things. And then when the water comes and mixes with that, then it produces growth. So he says, you see the earth as being khashiyah, in this state of having khushuu. And then when the water comes, it brings it, it moves it, and it produces growth. So perhaps one of the things we can understand from that is the state of khushuu is a state of being prepared and having the readiness and the components to produce growth, right? So just like the earth is in a state where it is ready and has the ability to produce growth when given the right conditions. Khushua is perhaps for us to enter a state, a mindset, a way of being, that when we interact with the Quran, the water, the life-giving water of the Quran will produce growth within us. So the state of khushua in certain ways could be a state of openness to whatever Allah is going to bring to our awareness and attention. Wa alaikum salam. Right? So perhaps that's one way of thinking about the state of khushua. So the state of khushua, like I said before, people interpret it or explain it as having this concentration and not having outside thoughts and these different things. But again, that can be difficult because if you've ever tried to make yourself stop thinking something, it's almost impossible. If you try to force yourself to not think something, right? You try to actively try to stop your mind from thinking something. Most likely, especially if you have other issues like myself, I've dealt with anxiety for years. I've dealt with OCD for years. So I had to learn over time through therapy, through reading, and through my own trial and error that the worst possible thing for me to do is to try to make myself not think something because it's just going to make it happen more. The best thing for me to do is to not be worried that I'm thinking something, just to don't even care about it. And it will generally dissipate on its own. So I think this is a different way to potentially think about khushua. That khushua isn't necessarily, like if you think that khushua is this ultimate state of concentration where you can't have any other thoughts, you're probably going to never achieve that, in my very humble opinion. And Allah knows best. Just from my own experience and just from what I've heard from so many people. Alhamdulillah, thank you. I appreciate that. Just from what I've heard from so many people, from my own experience, and from the fact that so many people complain about this. Have you ever noticed how many people complain about this? When it comes to khushua, how many people ask these type of questions? How do we not have these thoughts? How do I concentrate? Right. So that shows you, in my opinion, that in and of itself is a good indication that the way this concept is applied is very difficult to apply or not even possible, right? Because I don't know about that. That's a deep question, Salam. I have no idea. But this question, or this concept, the way that it's normally taught, right, to me is either extremely difficult or improbable or even impossible. Because look at the amount of people that complain that they can't do it. So when that occurs, in my very humble opinion and observation of being a Muslim I've been a Muslim over 30 years, right? So I have plenty of experience with this myself, and I have plenty of experience of talking to people about it over the years, of hearing different talks about it over the years. So in my very humble opinion, whenever you see a concept that is applied in a certain way where it causes harm or is difficult or seems to be impossible for large groups of people, chances are all those people aren't just messed up or don't just have low faith or don't, the normal things like, well, you got to increase your iman, you got to do this, you got to do that. That's blaming the person. But if it was just like one or two people, then you could say, yeah, well, everyone else seems to be okay with it. So like maybe, wa alaikum salam, maybe there are these different steps that you should take, right? But if there's large groups of people that have a problem with this, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh wa maghfiratuhu wa ridwanuhu. So when that's the case, to me, it brings into question the whole way the concept is being explained. And Allah knows best. So that's just a general rule, like that I think, I'm not saying it applies in every situation, but I think it's a good critical thinking tool. That if large groups of people seem to be having a problem with the way a concept is explained, I don't think it's just to just assume that all those people are just effed up. That's why. I think that it could be something, or it could have something to do with how we teach the concept.